And we are good to go. Let this tour begin. All right, everybody. So thanks for coming. It's great to have you all in the house. And I'll be showing you guys around the castle district of Prague today. It's the area around the Prague castle. It's not the Prague castle itself, though we will get to the castle. And I do want to do a tour of the castle soon. It just has to open so that we can actually get inside, show you. I've lived in Prague for about 11 years now, and I've been in Czech Republic more than 20 years. Museum of Kafka and Dali were fantastic. Yes, there are. Those are good museums. Julistan, and I'll be showing you some more as we go. Some ones that are worth visiting, some lesser known areas. A little bit about myself. My name is John Paul Franke, for those who have never toured with me. I'm American German Jewish, born in Thailand, raised in Switzerland, Germany, Austria, Hungary, the Czech Republic, and then I spent 1 year in South Africa and then settled back in Czech Republic, where I met my Panamanian wife, had my half Panamanian and half American German Jewish daughter, and worked as a tour guide for 7 years until the COVID pandemic happened. Then lockdown came, business shut down, and now I'm trying virtual tourism. This is my 3rd time doing it, and so far I've loved it. It's great. I mean, of course, I always prefer having the crowd in front of me, but it's still a great way to kind of rehearse the tours and keep learning and keep reading and do what I do and meet new people, even though it's across the world. It's great that you guys can see this from across the world. I love that aspect of it. But right now, I'm going to start by switching the camera angle and showing you a bit of where we are, and I'll start some of the narrative. Here we are. This is an absolutely beautiful, picturesque area, and it's called the Strahov Monastery, and here is the major building complex of the Strahov Monastery. The biggest church, the Church of the Assumption of Our Lady, is right in front of us here. And the Strahov Monastery has origins all the way back in the 1100s. In fact, the first buildings were put up here in the 1140s. I'm going to pan around so you can kind of see the whole area, because really this area is run by the Norbertine monks. Actually, to call them monks is not entirely accurate. These people are pre-Monstratensians. I'll get into that a little bit. Here's the Church of St. Roch that was added to the complex in the 1600s. It's a beautiful marriage of Gothic and Renaissance architecture. Now I'm going to continue panning around, tell you a bit about this. Now, the Strahov Monastery was built up in an area that was close to the castle guard quarters, which is why it's called the Strahov Monastery, Strahov meaning to stand guard in Czech. Good morning, Diana Garrity from California. Thanks for tuning in. I think I've had you on my other tours, if I'm not mistaken. Colleen, thanks for watching from New York. Great to have you. All right, so to get a bit more into the Strahov Monastery. Now, it started out in the 1100s as a wooden wall, and it had a Romanesque church in the middle of it. It owes its current day look to after the War of the Austrian Succession in the 1700s. This monastery has really had its ups and downs in history. It was very active at times, it was much less active at times. And the monastery also suffered damage in 2 wars, the 30-year War in the 1600s, and later the War of the Austrian Succession in the 1700s. And in the 1700s it was bombarded, so they rebuilt it with this fantastic Baroque facade, which I absolutely love. And Baroque is one of my favorite styles. I keep saying that. But it's incredibly decorative. It's a style that's meant to celebrate the wealth, the beauty, and the glory of the Catholic Church. And the interiors are even better. This thing has, I would say, the 2nd most beautiful library to be found in Prague, second only to the Clementinum Library near the Charles Bridge. And I'm going to show you what this library looks like. Let's see if I can load this properly. Here we have it. That is the philosophical hall. Sorry, not the theological hall, kept inside the Strahov Monastery. Beautiful, full of stucco and murals and frescoes, beautiful globes as well. I'll shut that down. Maro Parodi, the face mask. I'm keeping good social distance, so I'm better heard if I'm not wearing it. But over here, we have a brewery, which has operated in this area since the 1100s. Well, not since the 1100s. It's been shut down a number of times. Some people say it's the oldest brewery in Prague. Some say the Ufleku is the oldest brewery in Prague. Like so many things in history, it really depends how you look at it. But I want to talk a bit about the people who run this place. I said they're not monks, they're premonstratensians, and there's a few differences. Premonstratensian is quite a mouthful, so you can also call these people Norbertines or white canons. And they get the name white canon because they wear white frocks, as seen here. These are Norbertines. And they are similar to monks in many ways. But the difference between a monk and a Norbertine is that monks don't have many duties outside of their cloister, and also monks don't have to be ordained priests, they can be laymen. Norbertines, on the other hand, have to be ordained priests, and they live a cloistered life like monks. In fact, this church is very much the entire world of these people. They live inside, they have their quarters, they study, they read, they pray, and they are known often to till the land and grow their own food. And monks do all those things, but then also Norbertines have special vows. They take vows of chastity, poverty, and obedience. And although, I mean, when you say poverty, I don't think it means quite what a lot of us think. You know, like they live in this beautiful, luxurious place, but I guess it's a matter of not having too many earthly possessions to call your own. And also the duties of premonstratensians extend beyond the monastery. They also have to engage in public acts of mercy and liturgy and caring for the poor and preaching and sermons, etc. And we're going to keep walking down a little bit. And there's a very interesting museum over here. Alexa, I'm glad you're still watching. Thanks for tuning in. I'm sorry for the cutoff again. I'm glad YouTube is working. YouTube is looking a little more empty, so yeah, you can keep them company over there. And we're heading down towards the Černín Palace, and here, this door, it's the miniature museum. I'm going to get a little bit closer. And this is a very interesting museum to visit. It's quite unusual. I haven't heard of anything like this in any other places, but what's inside? Here it is. We get a bit closer, you can see. Museum miniature. There we go. Now, inside that museum is a bunch of microscopes with varying degrees of zoom. And you look through those microscopes, it might get a bit echoey. I'm not sure if that's actually going to show up on the yeah, you look through these microscopes, and inside you'll see all kinds of different objects that are carved in tiny, invisible to the naked eye things, like in the head of a needle. You can see a train of camels carved out, or there's objects ingrained in grains of rice. And they have the world's smallest book. It's 0.9 by 0.9 millimeters, and it has 30 pages inside with writing in them. And yeah, Chris, to answer your question, I have tested the route, and it kept strong signal throughout. So I hope the signal stays strong. Sorry, I lost my train of thought there for a second. So we're coming up here on the Černín Palace. It's just over to our left, and it's a whopper just around this corner. How are we doing? How's the signal? Has everyone got strong signal over there? Let me know if you're echoey but nice. Okay, good. So we kept. Diana Pombo, I think I've seen you before, haven't we? Thanks for coming. It's great to have you along. It's a fantastic day up here, Christian. It's a little breezy because we're up here on the hilltop, so I hope that's not shaking the gimbal at all. But the weather's great. I'm actually feeling a bit overdressed. It was really cold yesterday, despite being sunny. Today's nice. It's warm, a little breezy, but nothing bad. Yeah, this looks better. Okay, here we go. So we are coming up on the Černín Palace, and this is the site of it right here. We're going to get to the front and you can see just how big this building is. The Černín Palace is the largest Baroque palace in Prague, and it dates back to the late 1600s, and it was built by the Černín noble family after their family was elevated and achieved the the rank of imperial count. And they spent an absolute fortune on this building. Look how big that is. I'm going to cross here before a car comes. There we go. All right, now the Černín Palace, actually, when it was being built, it failed to impress the emperor. The emperor described it as a barn without a gate, and that really offended the Černín family. They did not feel very good about the emperor after that. But I think it's a beautiful building. I guess emperors are harder to impress. The building has gone through many different phases. It was served as a military hospital, a military residence. It even served as a residence for poor people. And nowadays, it is the Czech Foreign Ministry. So basically, it's a big, beautiful, bureaucratic office. Yeah, it's a fantastic place, actually. It's not a bad barn at all, is it? Let's see. So everyone, I'm getting a note that if you want to watch on YouTube, we need some hours there. Not that you have to switch over. If you're comfortable where you are, that's absolutely fine. But if anyone wants to help us get some hours on YouTube, that would be fantastic. All right. Over here, we have a statue of former Czech President Edvard Beneš. His name is here at his feet. Sabrina, hi from Argentina. Great to have you. And as I pan up, you're going to see just how happy this president was. Let me see if I can zoom in on his face there. Let's see. Yeah, that's not sure how clear it is, but this guy's got kind of a solemn, grim look on his face. Now, Edvard Beneš was president before the Nazi takeover. And during the Nazi time of occupation in Prague, Czechoslovakia, he operated a clandestine Czechoslovakian government in exile, which was recognized by the Allies as the official Czech government. And the Nazi occupation was considered illegal ever since the assassination of Reinhard Heydrich, which this man actually helps to organize. The assassination of Reinhard Heydrich was a big moment of Czech heroism in World War II. 2 Czech special forces trained in England are parachuted in, and they organize Operation Anthropoid. With very limited equipment, limited intel, limited help from the Czech resistance, they managed to set an ambush for Heydrich, throw a grenade at his car, fire shots at him, and they wounded him enough to kill him. And this story is actually told in the fantastic movie Anthropoid, which used to be on Netflix, but I think they took it down. It might be on Netflix in other countries, and if you have a chance, definitely check out this movie starring Cillian Murphy and Jamie Dornan. It's absolutely fantastic. Very accurately told story of the death of Heydrich. And it was a big blow to the Nazis. Heydrich was one of the highest ranking officers in the Nazi regime, and he was the mastermind of the Holocaust. It is said, though maybe not confirmed, that he wrote the Nazis' final solution of the Jewish question. So the fact that Heydrich died during this man's watch, that was certainly a moment of heroism. Sadly, though, this man is also remembered a bit as a historic villain, because during his time in exile, he started issuing decrees for the post-war expulsion of all Germans from Czechoslovakia. And Nikki, you've seen it. It's fantastic, isn't it? I'd like to know your opinion of those who have seen the movie. Let me know what you thought. But yeah, this guy, he did wrong by a lot of innocent German civilians, because when the war ended, August of 1945, later the laws go into effect, and approximately 2.4 million Germans are expelled from Czechoslovakia, dispossessed of their homes. And early records said that approximately 270,000 died because of the relocation. Although later studies showed it wasn't quite that harsh. It was maybe 15 to 30,000 people. That still doesn't make it okay. 2 wrongs don't make a right. So in my book, this guy's a bit of a villain historically. Some may disagree. Some Czechs may still remember him more for the heroism of Operation Anthropoid and some of the other good deeds he did. But that's how history goes, isn't it? I'm going to head down here to show you more about this church, the Loreto. So I have to just take a few steps back so I can get around the railing. I will jump down here. One second. There we go. I had to hop a railing there, but we are heading to our next destination. The Loreto. I wonder if anyone who's watching has actually been to a place called Loreto in Italy, because that's where this church gets its name. Now, you see, in Loreto, Italy, is a building known as the Santa Casa, the Holy House. And according to the legend, it's where the archangel appeared to the Virgin Mary and announced to her that she would give birth to the Son of God. Now, how did that end up in Italy, you might ask? Well, there's different legends. It is a fantastic church to those who commented. Hang on, I just want to... Teague Neal, thanks for being a supporter. It's fantastic. And yes, Diane, this is an absolutely beautiful piece of Baroque architecture. It involved a lot of my favorite architects, actually. One of them called Kilian Ignaz Dienstenhofer. His name is a mouthful, but his name is on so many of the beautiful Baroque masterpieces of Prague. And you see, the Santa Casa in Italy, according to the legend, was brought there after some of the Crusades by angels to protect the building. But they say it's more likely that the Pope had it disassembled and then moved over and rebuilt in Loreto, Italy. So later on, copies of the Santa Casa began spreading around Europe. So this is not the only one. It's not even the only one in Bohemia. There's other ones in other cities. But that building is the core of this church, and I'll show you what the Santa Casa looks like. There it is. Let me make it bigger. Hang on. That's not working. There we go. That's the Santa Casa. The carvings around it tell stories of the Bible, of Zacharias, and stories of Mary, etc. But inside, it's a very old-looking building, copied from the old building in Palestine. And let me exit. There we go. This church received its funding from the House of Lobkowitz. The Lobkowitz family is one of the oldest noble families of Bohemia. They were incredibly wealthy back in the day. They never held the title of king, but they were often the regents and the high nobility of the country. And they have a huge amount of history with Bohemia, involved in the wars and the politics, etc. And they actually had their hand in a lot of the palaces and churches that we're going to be seeing later on in the tour. Now, sorry, I just want to read a comment here. You didn't know, sorry, Nikki Oldroyd says, very good film. He was assassinated in it, didn't know the full story involving the Czech resistance and the church fight. Oh yeah, that's stuff you're going to learn if you watch the movie. It's quite historically accurate. I really appreciate that about it. All right, so here on the side of the church, we have the Loreto Treasury, which has beautiful ornaments, something like 350 ornaments from various nobility of Bohemia. And I want to show you my favorite piece of the church. Here it is, the Diamond Monstrance. Now, this monstrance is made of gold and crusted with 6,222 diamonds. Just a picture of the wealth that Prague had back in the day. Prague was known as the Golden City. For things like this, it just had so much gold they would even cover the outside of buildings in it. And here on the side, we have a church with much more simple and humble design. I'll get a little bit closer. This building is the Capuchin Monastery, dating back to the year 1600. Now, it's simpler by design, actually. It's not that they lacked the means to build a fancy church, but the Capuchin monks are a branch off of the Franciscan monks. And they believed that the Franciscans themselves were actually getting a little bit too far away from the original ideas of St. Francis, and they wanted to return to the simplicity and poverty that he emulated. So their churches typically were not nearly so fancy and so elaborate as the high Baroque churches of the Catholic Church. But there's a very interesting detail in this church. I want to get a little closer and show you more in depth. This church appears to have a few black heads. I'll show you what I mean. If you look closer, I'll zoom in. These black circles in the wall, those are cannonballs. This church was bombarded during the War of the Austrian Succession in the 1700s. Severe damage was done. They had to reconstruct it afterwards, but they plastered the cannonballs in as a memorial. You can see them all over the wall. Check that out. I'll zoom back out. There we go. Paula Velasco, hi from Poland. Nice to meet you. Thanks for tuning in. Now, the Capuchin monks actually administer the Loreto today. So even though this church would normally be a bit above the Capuchins' pay grade, they were put in charge of it all the way back when it was first done. And just to talk a bit about the Capuchin monks more while we're walking to our next destination, the Capuchin monks, not to be confused with Capuchin monkeys, they actually are, their name comes from the same place. Cappuccio is Italian for a hood. Or in Spanish, capucha. I learned that one from my wife. It's hood. So these are the hooded monks, essentially. And the furry tree critters in Central and South America, Capuchin monkeys, have a little black patch on the top of their head that resembles a hood. So hence the Capuchin monkey. And you're probably thinking of another word, cappuccino, which was actually named cappuccino because the color of the coffee, when it's mixed with the cream and milk, resembled the color of the garb worn by Capuchin monks. That's just a bit of historic trivia for you. Teague Neal. Thanks, I'm really glad you're enjoying the content. Fantastic, thanks so much. Shannon M, don't worry. Seriously, if you have any questions like that, you can ask. I love a good challenge, and I also love word plays, puns, all the works. All right, now here we're coming up on a building with a bit of a dark history. It's called the Domeček, which translates into Czech as the little house. The name kind of has a sinister ring to it already. And I want to show you a plaque here on the side of the wall. It says, "In honor of the victims tortured by the communist police." So that already tells you quite a bit. This place, it was a military prison in the days of Austria-Hungary, but then used by the Gestapo in World War II, and later by the communist secret police as a prison. Inside are 30 solitary cells. Solitary confinement cells. And prisoners in this place were horrifically abused and beaten and put in isolation. And the stories that I read in a book, Political Prisoners, are really grueling. So I won't get into too much detail, but this building serves as a bit of a dark memento of the communist days when the secret police was absolutely everywhere. The people of Prague in those days were so afraid of the secret police that something like 50% of the people were government informants, just because if you weren't an informant, you were often a victim. Thanks, Torvid. Thanks very much. I appreciate that. But yeah, we're actually going to see later on in the tour the house of a man who had to suffer the indignities that were contained inside the Domeček in the day. But before we get to that house, we're going to turn a corner here and get to a beautiful little side street known as Nový Svět. Let's just go down the street. I'm going to just pan in on the cobblestones a little here. You can see the cobblestones start to get a little rougher as we go. Here, actually, most of the cobblestone streets are repaired a lot in Prague. They dig them up every few years, lay them back. I think these ones are a bit more original. I haven't been able to confirm that, but just the roughness of them and the fact that they're so unkempt and so uneven in some places, I think they try to preserve this street in its really original look. Now here we're coming up. Nový Svět is the crossroad at the end here. Černin. The cobblestone roads are one thing that I really appreciate about Prague because it preserves the medieval feel of it. You know, you put pavement here and it kind of breaks the illusion. You don't really feel that you're in a medieval city anymore. Here we are, Nový Svět. Now, this street, even before the COVID pandemic shut everything down, that's a very good question. Sorry, to interrupt for a second there. Tignil, the color of the buildings, I honestly don't know who determines the color of the building. So I imagine that before you can actually change the color of a UNESCO World Heritage building, you'd probably have to go through a lot of channels and a lot of red tape and a lot of different sources. That being said, there was a big change to Prague's color some years ago. I think 7-8 years ago or so, maybe less. A lot of people started repainting their buildings. It was like Prague did a big push to add some color and vibrance because a lot of the buildings were more gray, and now they actually have a lot more pastels and a lot more colors to them. All right, so back to Nový Svět. Here we go. The Nový Svět, it means new world in Czech. Although to me the street really is the old world of Prague because it's a street that really still has a medieval vibe to it all the way up and down. It's a place that's home to a lot of writers and artists and musicians. It's a real bohemian hangout, if you want to say that. But this street and the buildings here actually date back to the 14th century, and it was a street that housed the caretakers of Prague Castle in the day. And the doors of this area all have little period details on them, which I think is absolutely awesome. But there's a very nice quiet vibe. As I was saying, even before the COVID pandemic, this was one of the lesser known, lesser appreciated streets. But to those with a real historic interest, people who love medieval areas, this was a great place to come and just kind of escape the tourist vibe and feel like you're walking through medieval Prague once again. Here we're coming up on the House of the Golden Gryphon. And this is possibly the best known house on Nový Svět. Its name comes from the plaque with a griffin just here between these two windows. I'm going to see if I can zoom in on that a little bit. There we go. There's the Golden Gryphon. I was saying in a previous tour, actually, a bit about this, how a lot of buildings had markings on them by which they became known as the House of the Stone Bell, House of the Golden Gryphon, etc., because that was an easier way to mark roads back in the day, and mark houses and corners, etc. But now, I'm going to zoom in on this plaque a little bit here. Tycho Brahe. Now, who is familiar with the name Tycho Brahe? Do we have anyone from Denmark in the house, I wonder? The famous Danish astronomer, the emperor's mathematician and astronomer, lived in the year 1600 in this house, which has been called to the Golden Gryphon. Okay, somewhat messy English on that plaque there. But Tycho Brahe is a fascinating character. He was one of the richest men in Denmark. I'm going to walk past his house and talk about him a little bit. Oh, Tignil, thanks. I'm glad you liked the answer. I wasn't sure if it was too detailed. Nikki Oldroyd asks, can you walk to the castle area from the Old Town Square, or is it too far? Nikki, you can walk pretty much anywhere in Prague. Prague is actually a very small city. It just depends how much time you're willing to spend walking. And Prague also has one of the best public transport systems in the world, so it's very doable. You could walk from the Old Town Square to the castle, I would say, in 20 to 30 minutes, depending how fast you walk. But you could also just hop on the metro and get across the river that way, then switch to a tram and head up to the castle gate in 2 stops. So people do it both ways. But getting into Tycho Brahe a little bit. Tycho Brahe, as I said, he was a Danish nobleman, astronomer, and he was so rich, it's said, that he owned approximately 1% of the wealth of Denmark. Which, I can't verify that, but it might just be a parable of how rich the guy was. Beautiful church here. I just want to zoom in on this. It's called the Church of St. John of Nepomuk, and it's a 1700s Baroque church from Kilian Ignaz Dienstenhofer, the architect I brought up before. As we go, Tycho Brahe was a real eccentric, brilliant astronomer in many ways. He didn't get everything right. He still believed the Earth was the center of the universe, but he also tried to break the old Greek model by saying that the 5 planets actually orbit the sun, while the sun orbits the Earth. So he was a bit off, his system was a mess, but his calculations actually contributed to the findings of Johannes Kepler. Kepler was his colleague here in Prague. Tycho Brahe only spent 2 years in Prague before his death, and he's actually buried in Prague right now in the Church of Our Lady Before Teen in the Old Town Square. Tycho Brahe did a lot of observations, calculations, and Johannes Kepler put it together later on. Tycho Brahe actually had a golden nose, because during a sword fight with his third cousin, they quarreled over who was the best mathematician, they had a sword fight over it. His nose was sliced off, and he had to wear a prosthetic nose for the rest of his life. He commonly wore one made of brass, but for parties he would whip out the gold nose, just a little a detail of his wealth, etc. And he actually had a pet moose. He tamed a moose from a young age, and it would walk alongside his carriage like a trained dog, actually. But sadly, one day during a party, the moose had developed a taste for beer. It got so drunk that it ran up some castle stairs, fell down, broke its leg, and died shortly afterwards. And Tycho Brahe himself, he died of a urinary infection or a kidney ailment of some kind. Some people say that during a party with Rudolf II, he didn't want to be rude and excuse himself to relieve himself, so his bladder got so full that it burst. But that's a medical impossibility, basically. He did fail to relieve himself at this party, but afterwards he could only pee in small amounts, and he became delirious towards the end of his life, and eventually died from the ailment. All right, here we're coming up on the Prague Castle Square. Alex, you liked the moose story. That's a weird bit of trivia, but I guess, you know, when you're in the Middle Ages and you can't spend your money on a yacht, what do you spend your money on? A big 500-pound exotic animal or something like that. All right. Now, oh, small detail. I don't want to miss this one. If anyone has seen the movie Amadeus, this building was used as Mozart's house in that movie. So it wasn't, to clarify, it wasn't Mozart's house in real life, but you will see him entering this house in the film, a masterpiece from Czech director Miloš Forman. And right next to it, the Martinitsky Palace, a beautiful example of sgraffito art. Now, this is a 1500s Renaissance palace that belonged later on to the Martinitsky family. And sgraffito, for those who missed my first virtual tour, is an Italian Renaissance form of art done on walls like this. It's where we get our word graffiti from. I'll see if I can get close up. This is an easier one to see. There we go. You see those pictures, those designs, they aren't painted into the wall, they're etched into the wall. It's 2 layers of plaster with contrasting shades, and the outer layer is scratched away to create these beautiful patterns. The story that is told here is the story of Joseph in Egypt, the Potiphar's wife attempting to seduce him. And later we have Joseph appearing in front of the Pharaoh. It's like the story of Joseph's time. Also, there's pictures of Hercules and Greek mythology. People were very much into mythology back in those days. Was it a Canadian moose? I couldn't tell you, although I would guess since he was Danish, it was probably a Scandinavian moose, if there is such a thing. I'm not great at biology, but that would be my guess. More likely than Canada, anyway. Yeah, so we're going to pan around here. There are 5 palaces just in this area. You see, the Prague Castle district was founded by the Burgrave of the Prague Castle. And therefore, it was a very appealing place, being so close to the castle, to house the royalty. The land value here was high. So in the 1500s, a lot of palaces started to appear in Renaissance and Baroque style. Let's take a look around. We're going to see a few of them down the road. There's 2 palaces behind the trees. That's a beautiful palace directly ahead. This is a palace right to my side. And then there's this this more unassuming house here, called the House of Cannon. And interesting story. This place, in the days of the communist regime, held salons inside. Those salons were known to have somewhat debaucherous parties. I heard descriptions of parties with women in the nude running around the salons. But upstairs were apartments that belonged to Jiří Mucha. Now, if you don't know the name Mucha, I would love for you guys to look up Alphonse Mucha. Alphonse Mucha is one of the greatest Art Nouveau painters in history. And Jiří Mucha was his son. Jiří Mucha was housed in here from the year 1950. Jiří Mucha, he worked as a writer, a journalist, a playwright, a screenwriter, etc. But unfortunately, he was suspected of espionage by the communist police and arrested without a word. His family did not know where he was. He was imprisoned in the Domiček, the Soviet secret prison that we saw earlier. And he suffered horrible indignities in the Domiček and later was sentenced to hard labor in uranium mines. But with the intervention of his wife, he was set free and he managed to live out the rest of his days in his wife's arms. But his wife actually saved the art collection of Alphonse Mucha, according to a story I just read recently, because a lot of the art was kept in this building, in the possession of Jiří Mucha. And the Soviet STB, the secret police, barged into the house and said that they were going to confiscate everything inside. And in a panic, Geraldine Mucha called up the British ambassador, she herself being Scottish, and the British ambassador said that she was a subject of His Majesty King George. And so the Soviet police left them alone, and because of that phone call, the paintings of Mucha have survived and did not fall into Soviet hands, for which I'm very thankful. You really need to look up the work of Alphonse Mucha if you've never seen it before. His Slav epic painting is one of my favorite pieces of art in the world, or a series of paintings, rather. Here's a beautiful palace as we back up. This is the Tuscan Palace. The Tuscan Palace is a piece of early Baroque architecture, built in the early 1600s. Up there near the roof, we have statues of the 7 liberal arts of the Middle Ages. I don't remember what all of them are, but on the list is rhetoric, grammar, math, music, etc. I think that's as far as my memory goes. And right next to the Tuscan Palace, we have the amazing Schwarzenberg Palace, this one dead ahead, an even better example of sgraffito. 100% of this building's exterior walls are etched with sgraffito. From a distance, people have often asked me, look at that building, it seems to have pyramids sticking out of the walls. And that's the illusion of the carvings. I'm going to get closer so that you can see a little bit more in depth. I'm glad you enjoyed it, Diana. Thanks very much. Which building, Alexa BP? I'm not sure which one you're talking about. The Schwarzenberg Palace or the Tuscan Palace? Here we go. Take a look at this. The entire wall. There's not a piece of it that doesn't have a pattern. Now actually, even though it's called the Schwarzenberg Palace, this building was built in the 1500s by the Lobkowitz family, and it was passed down through a few noble lines. The Schrambergs are on that list, but eventually the Schwarzenbergs took it over by marriage. It's quite the building to inherit through marriage arrangements, and nowadays it is used as part of the National Gallery. The Schwarzenbergs, they lease it out to the National Gallery free of charge, from what I read. Very good question, Tigneal. Prague puts a lot of effort into the cleaning of its buildings. And you'll often see buildings covered up in scaffolds so that they can wash off the dust. For some of the buildings like Gothic that are made of sandstone, they have to use a dry ice treatment method to clear away the dust because it really sinks in. Some of these buildings have a bit of an easier time, but yes, they absolutely clean them, 100%. All right, so what was I saying? I was going on about the Schwarzenberg family. the Schwarzenbergs actually still exist. It's an interesting thing. A lot of people ask me, like, does Bohemia have nobility or royal family? It's a complicated question. The simple answer is no. Because ever since 1918, Bohemia was a republic, then known as Czechoslovakia, the first republic of Czechoslovakia, and they abolished their monarchy and their nobility. So they don't have a king or a queen in the way England and the Netherlands do. They have a prime minister at the top, a president, a senate, and a parliament. They're actually a parliamentary democracy, meaning that Czech people will vote for members of the parliament and senate, and then the parliament will decide on the prime minister, voting the way their constituents would have them vote. So there aren't any royalty here per se, but that being said, we still have families that have royal heritage in Bohemia. Families like the House of Lobkowitz and the House of Schwarzenberg and the House of von Croy, they still exist. That's why actually people refer to them as Prince Martin Lobkowitz or Prince Karl Schwarzenberg. Prince Karl Schwarzenberg actually ran for presidency a couple elections ago. He didn't win. We have Miloš Zeman in office instead of Karl Schwarzenberg. But these guys are still involved in politics. They still have money. They still are highly educated. They're lawyers, and people sometimes vote for them based on, I think, their family legacy as princes of the country. Here we have the Salm Palace, a piece of neoclassical architecture from the 1800s. And over here, we have one of my favorite palaces of the district. This is the Archbishop's Palace. Prague still has an archbishop, actually. Even though Czech Republic is now the second most atheist country in Europe, the strongest religious denomination to exist here is the Catholic Church. And the highest official they have of the local Catholic Church is the Archbishop. And this has been the residence of the Archbishop ever since 1660, even though its current look is 1700s Rococo art. And Rococo is sometimes known as High Baroque. It's one of my favorite styles. It's like late Baroque period. And this is one of the best examples I think you'll find of it in Prague. Absolutely beautiful, it's decorative, it's fancy. And Prague has Baroque architecture absolutely everywhere. In fact, I know of a venue inside a hotel where you can have conferences and weddings. I'm gonna expand this a little bit. Here you go. Look at this area. Can you believe it? That's a church conference room right there in neo-Baroque architecture. It's called the Boccaccio Ballroom. And that's one of my favorite interiors. I had to share that with you guys. But yeah, the Archbishop still runs the Catholic Church, and his main church, you can just see the top of it here. Now, this is actually the front gate of the Prague Castle. The Prague Castle, it's going to be the topic of another tour one day. It's the biggest palatial complex in the world. It's in the Guinness Book of World Records for two reasons, listed as the biggest palatial complex and the world's biggest medieval castle. And as I was talking in one of my previous tours about how some people are starting to poo-poo the castle and say, like, oh, don't go there, there's not that much to see, it's overcrowded, it's full of tourists, and yada yada. And while I agree that in the peak season it does tend to get crowded and full of tourists, I'd say there's a reason for that. There's so much to see. I disagree that the castle doesn't have anything to see. This is the seat of Holy Roman Emperors, kings, nobility, archbishops, and the history of the castle is absolutely incredible. In fact, the Martinitsky Palace, which we saw earlier, the Sgraffito Palace with the story of Joseph of Egypt in the side, it was owned by one of the men who was thrown out the window in the second defenestration of Prague, which kicked off the 30-Year War. And in the Prague Castle, you can actually go and see where that happened. You can walk into the room, visit the window. You can't put your head out of it. The window is permanently closed for good reasons. But here we have a great panoramic view in the side. And since we're starting to get up to 45 minutes, I've shown you guys most of what I want to see. I'm going to go to this panorama, show you guys a few cool landmarks, but we're starting to get to the end and wrap things up. So if you guys have last questions, please shoot them at me right now. I'd love to see what you guys still want to know about. If I can fill in any gaps that I've left on the tour, please let me do so. I'd be happy to share any information I still can before we close up shop for the day. And for those who really enjoyed the tour, if you learned some good information, I'd really appreciate a donation on my PayPal account. For those who can't, I still appreciate you guys showing up. Thanks for your time, for your presence. But for those who can help, that really helps us stay active and helps me get through this hard COVID time until tourism can return. So thanks in advance to anyone who can do that. Very popular place for photos in Prague, right over the ledge of the castle stairs here. There we go. Let me just pan to the side here. Yeah, Teague, you're absolutely right. I did a video on Prague once, and I said Prague is like a Disney World where the fairy tale actually happened. Because here is where you can see the real Gothic buildings, the real Baroque, the real Renaissance, these beautiful palaces. It's absolutely incredible. Diana Pombo, thanks so much. Diana Gergely, thanks to you too. You guys have been some of my most faithful supporters on this tour. I really, really appreciate that. Thanks for coming on all three. And take a look at this. It's an interesting building. The German Embassy, Michalady. Yes, I can. That's the German Embassy right down there. Let me see if I can zoom in. There we are. German flag flying on the top. I was talking a bit about the Lobkowitz family. The German Embassy is actually housed in former Lobkowitz Palace. Beautiful architecture down there. The Malá area is just as full of palaces as the Castle Hradčany district. Up there, you're probably wondering, what is the Eiffel Tower doing in Prague? Well, that's a little replica that was built in 1891 during a World Fair. The Czechs built knockoffs of other famous monuments around the world, and they ended up with their Eiffel Tower. They love to say that it's actually 1 meter taller than the Eiffel Tower, but you have to include the hill. Yeah, we've got Starbucks coffee here, Nikki Oldroyd. That's absolutely right. Starbucks with a view. At least it adds some value to the Starbucks experience to have this great panorama in front of it. But here we go. You can see the lesser town of Prague down below, with its churches and its palaces. It was built on the bank of the river all the way back in the 13th century. That's actually a subject for another tour. Thanks very much, Julius. Sorry, I have a hard time reading your name. Julistan, I think I got that right. The pictures is something I was just experimenting with today. I'm glad you liked the added touch. It's kind of a way for me to show the interiors that I can't see with the camera while we do that. I'm going to keep doing that in Prague. Michelle D, I love the view too. All right. Diana Gergely, I can't wait to see you here. When you do come to Prague, please look me up. And I'm gonna say this for everyone who's watching. I'd love to give you a live guided tour in person one day. And if you do happen to come to Prague, if you appreciate the info, if you think I do my job well, then look me up. You can find me on Facebook. You can find me on email if you want to write to jp.franke.c4c@gmail.com. You can reach me there. I'll add my email to the comments of this tour later on at the end. And you guys can write me anytime. I'd love to hear from you, and I hope to see you in person one day. Thanks, Shannon M. I loved having you on the tour. Thanks very much for that. I was switching. So, guys, this brings us to the close. Thank you, Nikki. Glad you enjoyed it. Thanks for coming today. I hope you guys learned a bit, and I hope you got to see some interesting sights. And of course, it's always better to come and see it in person. Dade, I hope to see you and Yvonne here before you guys head back to the States. I'll probably be here before you go. If they let me travel, maybe I'll come and see you. Diana Pombo, thank you. And Michelle D, thanks very much. I appreciate it. Laura Flores, thanks so much for coming out. I really appreciate it, you guys. Thanks to everyone who came to watch, and everyone who commented, everyone who asked questions, everyone who participated. I really love to feel the crowd participation, and it's been great, guys. I want to say thanks very, very much for that. Greetings from Tehran, Reza. Wow, I've never actually been to anywhere near Tehran, but awesome. Thanks for tuning in. I'd love to go see it one day. Daniel Mucha, thanks for sharing. I appreciate it. Daniel, I loved having you here. Thanks very much. I appreciate it. Thanks so much, guys. So guys, it's been a wonderful time with you today walking around Prague, and it's been great. I've been wanting to come back to the Castle District and do a tour here again for a very long time, and today I got to, so thanks for making that happen. Sarah, thanks very much. I'm glad you enjoyed the tour, and please do come back one day. So everyone, this is going to be me signing off, so I just want to say once again, one last heartfelt thank you to all of you, and I hope to see you here. And with that, this is John Paul Franke signing off. All the best to you guys. Thanks again.